Good morning, everybody. It is Merritt with Master of One Coaching, and I am here for our weekly live Friday Leadership Live Friday. There we go. I'm going to know the name of my own stream. Excellent. It's been a long week. And I am very, very happy and pleased to be joined by my very good friend, Ellen Whitlock Baker, who is also a tremendous leader in her own right. We met many moons ago.
20 years ago,
maybe? In Seattle, doing theater work together and teaching young aspiring actors and early stage humans in the theater world. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. But look, you have a fan already. Anita says, "Yay, Ellen!"
Hi, Anita, one of the most amazing women. She's on the East Coast, so this wasn't early for her.
Oh, good. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Anita. And we'd love to hear more comments and questions as we keep going here. If you are watching us on the replay too, you can also drop comments and questions, and I'm sure we'll be happy to come back and regroup if you want to drop those. Okay. So Ellen, we have some ground to cover today.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with just a little bit about your background so people can get to know you a little bit, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, I'm so happy to be here, Merritt. This is really fun. Thank you for inviting me.
My
it's
pleasure.
A great way to spend a Friday after a very long week. So yeah, I am a theater major who moved out to Seattle in the 2001 thinking I was going to be an actor. And as you know, because you were already here, then the fringe scene here was really active and vital at that point in time. And so it was sort of doable that you could be an actor in Seattle and you didn't have to go to the big cities, the other big cities.
Yeah.
And I very, very quickly learned that that was not the life that would satisfy me for a couple of reasons. Like one, I didn't want to have to go to Topeka to play, Lady M for 6 weeks in the middle of January. Like that wasn't, I wanted to be in a place and stable. And so I knew that is pretty much demanded of an actor. So I was pretty happy to make that realization. And then also you were talking about how we were youth educators, and I had been doing a lot of work with you doing that, and also at a Boys and Girls Club, working with kids. And that actually led me to my first full-time job, which was a program director at a Boys and Girls Club out in Snohomish, which is a little bit north of here.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's when I became a real worker with benefits. And I remember my salary, I was so proud of it. It was $26,000 a year.
Oh, big time.
Yeah.
One time a year, an actor, that's a big time salary.
It was then.
Yeah, totally. It was.
Yeah. And what's funny is like it was great because I think I found then the passion that I have now for working for organizations, companies that have a mission that, they have something they want to put out into the world that will change it for the better, right? And so that's sort of been a theme through my career. And I learned so much working with kids. And, I know we'll get into some of this later, but really started to see my privilege as someone who had grown up in a really safe environment with a really great, parental structure and group of adults around me. And, I was working with kids who didn't have that, and particularly teens, and seeing them not know where they were going to go to sleep at night and not have enough food and, be sort of in the crosshairs of drugs and alcohol. And it was really eye-opening. And so I think that helped shape early in my career, my worldview. And then after that, I went to work at the University of Washington, mostly because the commute to where I was working was so long that I wanted to work in Seattle, which was much closer. And I ended up at the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance. And when I first started working there, I was reimbursing travel and doing like our credit card. And Anita, who just commented, was my very first travel reimbursement I ever had to do. And she and a professor had gone to like 6 different foreign countries. And so I had to take this every day you had to do like a different currency conversion, and it was this stack like this big. It was so complicated, but that's how she and I became good friends. And yeah, and then I just kind of worked my way up into doing some budgeting for faculty members who were doing grants and looking at budget analysis and things like that. And as I was there, I realized I'd never heard of a Master of Public Administration before.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was talking to faculty and students and staff, I was like, oh, this actually sounds like something I would like to do. And I take a couple classes just to kind of see if I liked it. And I really did. So then I was a student there for 2 years. And while I was there, I worked for the dean, which was an incredible opportunity because I really got to see higher education like from the inside in the politics of it, which are really complicated. Like I grew up the daughter of a professor. My dad was an English professor at the University of Hawaii. So I kind of knew the vibe, but like it definitely, it's in a big university with professional schools and R1, like it's complicated. And so I really appreciate that time because I learned a ton about how things actually function and get done. And then I got to work at an amazing nonprofit called Shunpike for 3 years after I graduated, where I was doing work out in the community with artists and helping support the business side of art, which, as you know, artists are not always thinking about or don't know about or don't learn about in school. We had a lot of, young folks who had just graduated from art school, creating theater companies and dance companies, who didn't know that they needed a license to throw a party and serve alcohol. And, so I felt like I was constantly saving them from, horrible fines, but it was really a great opportunity.
Yeah.
And and then I went back to work at the Evans School and was hired and did marketing communications there and found my way slowly after having my kiddo, to the University of Washington Alumni Association. So I've been there for 7 years, and it's just really amazing work. I get to think about how we engage our alumni population, which is huge. We have 500,000 living alums. Wow. And they are really starting to become a very different group of folks. The way that alumni associations, we thought they ran, and all the things that we've been doing for years. And I would say UW has been really trying to do much different things than the typical tailgate party, for many years. So we've had a great leader who's been taking us in the direction of really being thoughtful about our alumni community, but we're learning we need to know more. And so that's a phase we're entering into right now, which is like creating some authentic listening opportunities. The last 20 years of alums they're just way different than in the way they think, in their racial makeup, than the 20 past years. And so we're having to really think about what they need and want. And we're working on that right now. So there you go. There's my story.
Well, so there's so much, and you and I have so much alignment here, which I think is really fun to connect with you now, as we have had some parallels in our lives and stayed, sort of loosely connected, and now connecting on this, like seeing where actually the seeds of our passion we were initially talking about how the seeds of that actually started in theater. And I had the similar story, right, where I talked about my first exposure, again, growing up in a very safe environment where I didn't have to worry about my next meal. I was very privileged growing up, and then having my eyes opened once I started working with kids in theater. And a lot of that was for mine started in New York City, but then when I got to Seattle, and shout out to Mimi Kitano, who is the
Mimi,
incredible leader and still there. Is she
really? Oh my gosh, she's amazing. She is, yeah. I learned so much from her.
She's an incredible leader at Youth Theater Northwest. And yeah, I learned a ton from her as well, and personally and professionally. And that's where you and I connected, right? Was you there? Was it?
Yeah, Youth Theater. Yep.
Yeah. So the opportunities there to understand the world outside of what my initial exposure was, right? And that sounds like it's similar for you, right? That's how you connected, yeah. We were talking also before we came live about being a recovering actor. And which is exactly how I say it.
Can you ever recover, Merritt?
I mean, there are things. So there are lessons learned that we apply, right? So what are some of the things that you learned as a creative, as an early stage professional in the creative industries? What were some things that were useful for you?
You know what's so funny? Actually, it's different than what we were talking about, but I just realized that I learned failure. And I have to say, I wasn't a great actor. Like, I loved it. I was so passionate about it. I also really wanted to be a ballerina. Like, if I could do anything in my life, I would be a ballerina. I really would, because I just adore it. I love dance, but I am not built for it. And I just didn't have all the talent to be an actor. And I realized that I think what helped me eventually quit was I realized that I could hold that passion, but I didn't have to express it that way.
Yes.
Right. And
Yes.
I think
Yes.
that was really helpful for me, because I was like, you're just constantly having to put yourself out there in an audition, or even like a huge long audition process where you go in and you go in and you go in, and then you eventually don't get the part. And I think that that's such a good, fertile learning ground as you're coming up in the world, as you're a young 20-something, just not getting everything you wanted, and really learning that lesson that, like, it's so quick. You're like, no, we don't want you for that. You're not good enough, or you're not right, or you're not, and I think having that experience over and over just helped me be more resilient.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I would add to it that it taught me very quickly about my independent streak and my very, very strong desire to not be at the mercy of somebody else's decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It really like kicked my entrepreneurial genetic coding into high gear, and I found it took me a long time to figure out how to apply it. But I was like, initially it was because I started my own company with some partners, and so I was like, well, this is where I get to be. Not that I needed to control over other people, but I needed to be in control of me. Not waiting for other people to tell me if I was good enough or if I was right. Right? I'm just going to make that decision for myself, and that's something that is so that was very strong on me. And the other thing is, I talk about it in terms of leadership all the time. I mean, as a project manager, right, stage managing, project managing, company managing, directing, producing, we hire several times a year. We complete projects several times a year. We have to learn how to hire the right people for the right job at the right time. We have to learn how to hold the container and get out of the way, because you can't tell everybody what to do. You got to hire the right people so they get to do their best thing, and then let them do their best thing. And if they screw up, you sort of, put the bumpers on and go, okay, let's come back together. And then the other thing is, once the project is done, you're out.
Yeah.
Right? Like, especially as a director, right? As a director, you do your thing in opening night,
like,
and then you're done. You gotta let the people do it. It's their show, right? So, and the stage manager then has a different role. They were sort of the second or third in command, depending on the chain. And then when the show goes up, is the stage manager who takes over and runs the logistics of it. So it's the clarity of role, I think, is really something that I so value, that I learned from the theater, because it taught me how to identify the genius in everybody. And I didn't think of it consciously at the time, but now I'm looking back and I'm going, yeah, I can see that person is excellent with lights. Maybe not, maybe they're the company designer, but maybe they're not the best at costumes, but we're going to put them where they're really good. And the person who's really good at that, right? And that's okay, because we need everybody at their best. I think in a corporate setting or a workplace setting or even a startup setting, we're like, okay, everybody, which is the other piece of it that's great about theater, is that everybody roll up your sleeves and do what you need to do.
That's true in alumni engagement work as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well,
I'm constantly blowing up our giant 20-foot husky dog that we call Airy the Husky. I can do that. That's part of my skill set.
That's a good resume holder, right? Inflatable
on the resume.
But there's that element too, and that's really useful in nonprofit work and in startup work too, which is what I do now. The trick about that is learning how to evolve that into something that's with more clarity and more structure and more trust, right? When can the founder or the ED or the board let go?
That, this is bringing up so much for me, because I'm thinking about directors and actors, and really that it's coaching. If you have a good director, now we've had many different kinds, but a good director will figure out how to coach you into, really embodying that part. And it's sometimes they're sneaky about it, and sometimes they're not, but like the best ones would. And that's a really interesting thing that I'm thinking about, especially in your work. Like that is a key, that's a key skill, right? And you learn, you know, that's a really good place to cut your teeth on it. And then the other thing I was just thinking about was the director handing things over. What a great analogy, because I remember very clearly being on stage and seeing in the audience at the back of the theater in my undergrad days, Nancy Simon, who was like, she was awesome. She is awesome. Standing at the back of the theater, just kind of watching. And she, you know, after the show opened, the director doesn't come and talk to you about it again. You don't get any more coaching. It's like, it is yours now. And I just remember that being so hard to think about, like, oh man, you just give it up. And what a great reminder that is what that's the best way for us to be with our staff and our teams, right? Is to say, I'm going to coach you to this place, and then it's yours. You take it. And that's where I think we make mistakes, is when we're like, oh, but you did this. Could you maybe, rather than really fully letting them own it, I'm going to remember Nancy Simon at the back of the theater now. That's going to be a good mental picture for me as I work.
That's where micromanagement comes in, right? That's what people
exactly.
Very, they start to feel like they're not trusted, like they're not valued, like that maybe they're the wrong fit because their boss, but it's really the boss that is coming in. And there's a relationship breakdown there because the boss hasn't. Maybe the boss is feeling like they didn't do their best job coaching, or they could do more. And maybe the boss is interested in themselves with what their job they've done up front. But the collaboration, which is really the keystone for a healthy and thriving leadership relationship, is exactly that. It's, I'm going to bring my best stuff. You're going to bring your best stuff. We're going to work on it together to create this thing that we couldn't do by ourselves.
Right.
Greater, as Stephen Covey talks about as a third option, right? The thing that we generate together. Each of us individually, and then we're going to let that live. And we, as the boss, as the leader, have to step back and hold the container, but let them do their thing, and also make it okay to fail within reason, right? You got to put plans in place to see if there's room to fail. Let them fail. You
have to. I think. Yeah, I think that is the hardest thing. There's so many hard things about leadership. But that to me is one of the hardest things, because I'm 100% a type A. Like, I am an intense type A who wants to succeed at everything, which I have learned is a serious white dominant cultural trait, right? And so it's been a really complicated but necessary undoing for me of that need to win at everything, to succeed at everything, and to ask my team to have that same, attitude, because I think it's like a buzzword that leaders say, it's okay that we fail. And, sometimes that is not true. And I've heard it described in ways of like, well, we let the staff decide on the catering for the event to be family style rather than individual plates, and it didn't work, but that's okay. We let them fail. Well, no, that's a tactic that didn't work. That's not a whole, really like letting them own something and see how it goes. So that, I think, is a complex space to be in, particularly as a white leader right now.
Yeah. And it speaks to perfectionism and, unrelenting standards and all kinds of and so that's a whole huge topic in and of itself. And I really appreciate the segue that you just introduced, which is the white dominant culture traits. Because I'm going to switch gears a little bit and touch on, we can't have a leadership conversation this week or any week really without having dealing with the topics of the day.
Yeah.
And that includes the George Floyd verdict. And I know that you do a lot of work. I have a history in DEI, though I'm not as active as a professional in it anymore. I have my family, which is we're the rainbow of fruit flavors in our family. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about your experience and your lens in the role that you're in, and at the university, and also as a public policy expert. What
nerd.
What are some of the things that you'd like to bring to the table, and what are the topics that you're dealing with right now?
I mean, let's talk for a while, because it's complicated. I think the thing first and foremost for any white leaders out there you have to do the work yourself of recognizing your privilege and learning about white dominant cultural traits. Go Google them. They're online if you haven't checked them out. And then as you read them and put a check mark after every single one of them and realize that you're living your life through that lens, it kind of blows your world up. And it's really unsteadying as a leader. And I think we're going through that process right now in our organization and with many of my colleagues that I've talked to, which is like, okay, so we're a predominantly white staff in a predominantly white industry, which is higher education, philanthropy, and advancement. And there's some serious issues. And it's once you start uncovering all of that, it becomes overwhelming, which is such a privilege for it to be overwhelming. I mean, I do really want to say, like, a lot of what I'm talking about comes from my perspective, where I have had the privilege of saying, oh, that's too hard to think about right now. I'm going to go, have dinner with my family or go out and not face any of the same challenges that my BIPOC colleagues face. And so I think that there's this like reckoning there that you have to have, right? And then as we do our work, it's just uncovering like thing after thing after thing that's based on years and years and years and decades and centuries of white dominance. And so that's where I really aspire to be a learner, not a knower. And that's something I got from Aiko Bethia. So if y'all don't know Aiko, find her immediately. And she did 2 podcasts with Brene Brown on the Dare to Lead podcast, which I listen to religiously. That incredibly helped shape my thoughts as a leader. So she talks about transformational leadership in the DEI space as opposed to transactional leadership. And that's something we've really embraced at UW, University of Washington, where I work. So yeah, I think that's one, I would start there. And I'd love to hear your thoughts there too, Merritt, because that's really helped me. Because as a type A person who wants to know everything, I want to get my check mark in DEI work, like in the back of my brain. Right, and it's like, no, it's never done. You will never get it. You will never win it necessarily, but you will continue to learn. And when you make a mistake, that's okay because you're still learning. And so it helps prevent me from not taking action for fear I'll mess up, right?
Right. The messy action. So Anita has a great comment here that I'm going to share. She says, I really appreciate Ellen's comment about white dominant cultural traits. For instance, failure isn't something that all have the privilege to manage in the same way. 100%.
Great point, Anita.
Very good point. Because many people don't have the room to fail because they're not, there's so many sort of deep-seated suspicions or there's a lack of trust that sort of, because culturally, interculturally, that is extended without any sort of consciousness, right?
Or they're having to work twice as hard.
Yeah.
I mean, women of color in particular, they're so like women in the workplace already bear a burden of being perceived as, bossy or bitchy or, all these things that like men aren't seen the same way. They're seen as leaders and glorious and all the things, right. But women of color have even a bigger burden than that. And so that's been also, I think Anita's point is really well made. It's like, you have to be, as a person of color in a workplace, you have to be on your game all the time because you're scrutinized in a really different way than white folks, particularly white men. I don't know if you can see my mediocre here, which is the Ijeoma Oluo's new book about white men. And it's, I mean, sorry, there are great white men in the world too, but like that, the world is set up for them to succeed.
Yeah. Right? That's a good point too. Like, we're not here to bash on anybody. We're just here to shine light on all the different dynamics that are in play. And
correct. I
love him dearly, and he's an amazing man. So
I mean, and that's the whole thing is we're not all monoliths. And I think that's the other thing is that like people of color often, in the workplace get treated as a monolith, and it's like everyone's going to feel and process differently. Like, for example, with the verdict for the Derek Chauvin case, we put out a message in our organization, the president of the university and the head of advancement and all of us, within our own shop said, this is a really complex time. It's it's not, justice has not been served. This is a personal accountability happened for one individual, but the feelings about it are complex even for me as a white woman. And I know and have heard that much more complicated for people of color. And so, we told our folks, take whatever time you need, do what you need, process, heal, be in community, or don't, it's totally up to you. And it was, like I said, going back to folks not being a monolith, like some folks took time off and some folks were like, no, I'm going to just keep working. That's what I want to do. So I think we have to be really, as leaders, I think we have to start, that can be complicated too, because if you have a big staff and you're thinking about large groups of people, which we're doing like in the Alumni Association, you're thinking about 500,000 people. How in the world do you really understand what those folks need and want from you? What programs are going to support them, make them feel great and connected to the university? Same thing with your staff. How are you going to know what policies are going to support them, make them feel welcomed, included, belong, when you have such a massive number of people? So that's where I think the employee resource groups really come into play, and the ability to, have folks gather in community with people they resonate with, and then use that community as a voice for all. But it's complex.
It is very complex. And I think that what you said about, none of us are a monolith. And this makes me think about how, in our family this week, and this feels very vulnerable to say out loud, but I'm going to say, because I think it's important. I mean, one of my big tenets of leadership is that, we're all whole people. And, regardless of whether we, are told to leave our shit at the door or not, I mean, it doesn't happen, right? It doesn't happen for anybody, even if we think it does, it still doesn't. And so from a personal standpoint, as a mom of kids who I have one kid who's half Mexican, and I have two kids who are African American. And one of the kids said this week, they're the twins who are Black. They both were saying, they both had different opinions about the verdict this week. And one said, was asking about what they're 12, but, tell me more about the origins of Black Lives Matter, and like, what is that all about? And we've talked about it, extensively, but they were one was digging into sort of like the specifics of the movement. And the other one was saying, but all lives matter. And I thought, so, right. I mean, he is a kid who has been through a tremendous amount of trauma. He lives in a mostly white area, which is, in a higher education community where there's a lot of great heart in the right place. And there is a fair amount of diversity on the university campus. And so as a community, we're working very hard to figure that out. He's been embraced in many respects. They have been, and we have as a family. And yet here's a kid who just isn't, and he's 12. He doesn't have a full understanding of what it means to say all lives matter versus Black Lives Matter. And he was genuinely curious, like, well, why are we saying that? And so my husband and I were like, okay, we have some more work to do here, right? And are we the ones yes, we are the ones to have the conversation. And also, who else do we need to bring for him to have the conversation with?
Right.
We can't bring the whole perspective, obviously. We can tell him what we think. We can tell him how we believe. We can give him books, when he's ready for that. We can expose him to whatever he wants to be exposed to and support him. And also, we just can't give him the full perspective. So, and as a leader and a leader of leaders, right, which you are and which I am, we need to be honest about those conversations and be like, we're screwing it up all the time.
Yeah. That's so funny. I had I relayed the story at a panel I did for Women's Day, but we were driving in the car past this house, and it has these two Blue Lives Matter signs. And we were, we must comment on them frequently, because my daughter from the back seat, she's 7, was like, blue lives don't matter. And we were like, okay, well, it's not that they don't matter, but
right.
It's the expression of, and it's like, how do you communicate that to a 7-year-old? When, like, I don't even know how to explain policing right now. And, I don't. And so I think that our kids actually teach us a ton. And I'm so appreciative of you being vulnerable, because I think that, again, a huge Brené Brown fan, but like, that is a tenet of leadership. And that is what I am seeing modeled in the leaders I really admire that's what's modeled. It's like, they don't come and say with this veneer of, I have all the answers, or don't worry, I've got it, or whatever. I really appreciate when someone says, I am struggling with this, but I know this and I'm going to try to, X, Y, or Z. Like, they don't abdicate responsibility or make me feel like they don't know what they're doing, but they are willing to admit when they're wrong, bring in personal stories, especially women. Like, I so appreciate you talking about your kids, because for so many years we weren't supposed to. Like, I came up at a time when you kind of like hid the fact that you had a kid. And when I had my daughter in 2013 was right when my career was starting to I was like a director, and, and I got this job about 6 months after she was born. And I really felt like I had to kind of suppress that part of me and be really available and do, I traveled a ton before COVID. And it's just when I was on a leadership team with 2 men who had kids, no one ever asked them who was watching their kids. No one ever asked them if they had to get home to pick up their kids. We had a board member one time say, oh, we need to end on time because Ellen and Courtney need to go pick up their kids, when there were like 4 men in the room who had kids who were the same age that our kids were, and those were not mentioned. So it's still like,
and they probably thought they were doing the right thing by you by saying that.
They totally were. I mean, like, again, intention versus impact, right? But like, it just goes to show what value it is to continue to talk about our kids. And I think that's a big thing about COVID is like, my daughter's constantly like running and screaming and, I don't know, asking me to watch TV and it's always when I'm giving a presentation. Like, it's never when I'm just,
of course.
Always when I'm like, she's like locked in her room right now. I'm kidding. She's with my husband, but like, yeah, I think I want to go back to talking about DEI work, but I do think that vulnerability is a really important piece of being a white person in doing DEI work, which is like, it's not abdicating responsibility for it, but saying, yeah, I'm probably going to screw this up, but I have to try to change the way that I work and that we work, right?
A couple points there. One is, like, I was on a client call yesterday, right? There's people who are entrusting me with their careers and their lives, or at least in partnership with them. And they're, investing a lot of time and resources into this time. And my 2 twin boys come in, and I've got a glass cabinet, which is stupid of me, and a glass door, which is also stupid of me. And they come barreling because they're chasing each other. They slam open the glass door into the glass cabinet. It just happens to hit the right spot where it didn't shatter. But I was like, and they just had to do it. Like, oh, there they are, it's so interesting now that we're seeing more men, right? Like newscasters, we see these kind of funny videos, and newscasters or executives and their cats are coming across, or their kids.
Yeah.
Actually, we are all dealing with it. And so that's been one of the blessings, I think, of like walls the virtual walls and the actual walls have been blurred between work and life. So I think that we're going to see a continued shift in evolution of compassion,
totally,
humanity in the workplace, which I think is a great benefit. I also want to make a quick comment too about the Blue Lives Matter thing too, because that's a very tricky conversation.
It is,
especially when we're talking about leadership too. And as working at a university, we have to have a really strong and healthy relationship with law enforcement and first responders. And I've done incredible programs. I've been partnered with some incredible departments in law enforcement. And so again, there's no monolith. It's all right. We have to look at the system, and we have to look at the individual as they're participating in the system.
Yeah, we had yesterday we had a board meeting, and the head of student life for the University of Washington, who oversees about 4,000 things. His job is massive, but one of the things he oversees is the police, the campus police. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about, we're really listening to the students and their desires, to really look at how campus police responds to things and how Seattle police responds to things. And it's so complex. Like we have a light rail station that's just about to open, which is super exciting. Really? You probably paid taxes for this when you lived in Seattle 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh. That's awesome.
But it's about to open. and it's just right there. And so people, kids will be able, they're not kids, students will be able to get off and, walk right back to their dorms or wherever they live. And Denzel was saying that that's a huge, they're really nervous about that because they come back at 1 or 2 in the morning, and, that area there's a lot of challenge on those streets, folks that just have housing insecurity and food insecurity, and there's some issues with drugs. And so it's just this complicated web of, will they be safe leaving there and going to campus where, we're entrusted with their care as they're here. So, how do we work with police? But then sometimes police, being there is fearful, or
antagonizing.
It's complicated. He was talking about how they are, one of the things they're doing is for officers who respond to someone getting locked out of their office, or really their car is broken into or towed, minor things, they're going to not be armed. So for campus police, they're working on how do you do some first responding without having to be armed when the situation isn't dangerous. And I think that that's one step. But yeah, I don't know enough about this to get into it, but I do know that it's complicated. And I appreciate that the students, that's one cool thing about working at a university, and I'm sure you're seeing it too. And you'll see it with your kids, right? As they become activists and they get older, which I learned is a big thing about Gen Z in my workshop yesterday. Years. I think they're going to continue to push us and push us to overhaul thinking that we've had for decades that may not be right anymore, but feels right because it's all we know.
Right.
And so that's you and I were talking about this before, but I think that's another thing to really dig into, which is this younger workforce that we're leading. They think and work really differently than we do. And, our younger workforce, it was pushing us to put out a statement about policing after George Floyd's murder. And, we were as an alumni association, what are we supposed to do? Do we need to do that? Should we do that? And so it was really a good, I wouldn't say the conversation was good at the time. I think we've learned a lot since then. And again, we're learners, not knowers, but it's a place that's super uncomfortable and scary, and that we have to keep going to and keep having those conversations and keep thinking, do we need to do things differently?
Yeah. And I completely understand. I hear a weird well, I hear this a lot. We were talking about this before too. I hear this a lot from people who are in executive positions right now, or C-level positions, or even they're startup founders, and they're we're hiring younger people. There's this sense of the younger generations are so entitled. They use that word, entitled. And when I hear that, I was like, what do you mean by entitled? What are you seeing? And they said, well, they're not willing to come to work and put 80 hours a week and not complain and put their head down. And they're just not willing to do that. They say that I'm going to come in at 9 and leave at 5, and they're going to have their weekend. And that's all they're willing to do. And I'm like, so that's a boundary.
Yeah.
And right. And you and I were talking, we didn't.
Is that bad?
Especially in the theater, by the way. Theater is notoriously boundaryless in lots of ways, which we've seen unfold over the last few years as well, which is one of the reasons why I wasn't comfortable there anymore. But again, that's changed too. So, right. But so these younger professionals are saying, I'm actually going to not live to work, but I'm going to work to live. And also, I want my work to mean something, because the world is burning down in many, many ways. And thank you very much for that, by the way. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm carrying a burning ball of fire. Right. I have to go now figure out how to deal with this. And maybe I get tired of dealing with it all the time, and I want to go and have a little fun and rest. And I'm going to prioritize my care. And we're like, what do you mean you're going to prioritize your self-care? Right?
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. So
I thought we were supposed to work until we were exhausted. Isn't that what we were supposed to do, and never take our vacation? No.
Yeah. And isn't that the whole coffee industry is predicated on that?
Yeah.
Person, right? God bless Seattle for launching that for us, as I drink my cup of coffee. And I love coffee too, so that's not I don't mean to cast aspersions on coffee either. Because I can just see the comments coming in. No. I'm just making observations here. I'm not. There's no judgment, but it's certainly not perfection on my end at all. Yeah. So right. So where is and there is also, not to say that their perspective is impervious to
no, that's
either, right?
That's the complicated part. And I actually think this is one of the biggest challenges for leaders right now, and will be for leaders to come. I keep using the word complicated, which is, I can't think of any other word, but everything you're saying is so true. And I think we were taught, like, I'm in my 40s, like I came up at a time where I worked particularly for women I worked for a dean who had been the first in so many ways as a professor of public policy and a dean and whatever, and had to kind of claw her way to the top. Same with the woman who was head of our advancement shop. And they have a very particular view on me as the younger generation of, like, you didn't have to do the same things I did to get here.
Right.
And so, you should be grateful for the path that we forged for you. And I often see, like, that was like, well, yeah, I'm grateful, but also, like, I have good ideas too. And, so there's an interesting, that was an interesting dynamic. And then now the folks that are 10, 20 years younger than me are having a similar dynamic to me. Like, I find myself saying, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've lived all of these things. I've done really hard things. I've experienced so much in this job. How are you, who are 2 years into the workforce, 5 years into the workforce? Why do you think you know more than me? And that's the place where I have to really check myself, because their perspective, and again, monolith, but like this younger workforce perspective is all of those things you were just saying. They've seen the world on fire. They've been online their entire lives, when I didn't get an email account till college. Facebook didn't exist when I was in college. I got my grad, my acceptance to my college is faxed to me. So
and that's even technology that I got mine mailed. So.
Well, they were mailed. I got one of them faxed, and that was like a big deal, because the college counselor like called in a favor I was rejected. So it was sad. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, I'd love to think about that with you. Like, yeah, I'm curious about how we model both leadership when we make a decision and say, like, I need to lead. I am a leader. Like, I'm privy to a lot more things as a leader that will help me give context for decisions. But when do we involve them in that decision making? When do we stop and say, wow, you have a really good point. Maybe we're doing that wrong. It's been something we've been wrestling with. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, from my perspective, it's all about establishing culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is also a process that it's ever evolving, right? And what you're talking about too is this idea. And I know we're running a little over, so I appreciate you saying.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't apologize.
I could talk to you all day.
I know, and please come back, because I would love this. But I want to wrap this up, just because I know most people don't have a attention span for a full hour or so. But I think that if we could sort of land on this, is the establishment and or establishing and the commitment to a dynamic, ever evolving culture.
Yeah.
And it is the learning versus the knowing. And it is we're going to make a commitment to continuing to try to work to understand.
Yes.
To work to include.
Yes.
To evolve, to work to grow, to work to change when change is necessary, but not change for the sake of change.
Right.
And that is rooted in the company, the organizational culture, the culture of place, right, within teams. And that takes time, and that takes training. It takes intention. It takes clarity of communication of values, and it takes building and enacting processes over and over, practicing processes over and over and over again, so that people can trust those processes and trust the people who are engaging in them and who are leading them. So it's not, there's not a one size fits all solution. It's not certainly a light switch. I wish it were. If I had a pill for that, I would be a bazillionaire. I do not, but I do have processes, and so that's.
Yeah, I think you're so right, and I think it's that learning, that being a learner, and I am learning a lot by asking questions, and that is 100% a Brene Brown technique, but it's so helpful because it's rather than me being like, okay, you're wrong, me saying, okay, it sounds like you're not that, what I'm hearing is that you don't agree with that. Tell me why. I want to know more, and like that opens a dialogue. And I'm not perfect at this. So if anyone who works for me or with me is listening to this, I know I'm not always great at this, but I'm trying to be, because, and I think that goes for anyone you're dealing with, whether it's an early career workforce person or anyone, because the listening and the asking is what builds that culture, that trust. Yeah. As opposed to the knowing and the saying, well, I got this handled, don't worry about it, So I think that's a really
intention. The collective intention to communicate. Yes. Okay, we're going to extend our trust enough to understand that we're all working together towards this goal of understanding.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We're all part of this. Like everybody's voice does matter.
And that has to be spoken and written and enforced again and again and again. It's not something that can be assumed.
Nope.
Ever.
Nope. No.
No one's going to assume it. Until
and it's not fluffy. Like we need to spend time on, like, I think we also come from a culture of not bringing your feelings to work and not bringing like these kinds of conversations to work. And you can't do that anymore, and you can't as a white person, not, if you are in any, like in life, but also in the workplace, you need to read the books and do that work on your own time. Come to terms with your privilege, comes to terms with the fact that, we operate in a world that's very different from people of color. And we have the seats at the table, as Jodi Ann Burey says in her amazing TED Talk, which you should watch, about why BIPOC folks shouldn't bring their authentic selves to work. We have the seats at the table often as white folks, and it's our responsibility to do the work to start changing. It's, we should bear that burden. So I think that's, we're
not on the people who are
it's too privileged for us to ignore it and to just sit in our comfort and say, oh, well, I went to that training and so I'm good. Or I read that one book, or I listened to that one podcast. So, whatever. It's no, you have to be that person. Well, I'm saying have to. I choose to be that person who tries to make change, and it is really uncomfortable, and you don't always get a great reception, and it can be really challenging with your leadership if they're not listening to you, which is not the case in my situation, but I know it can be, and we have to do that. But there's just no option. You can't be a leader right now and not be trying to figure out how to change centuries of hierarchy that has advantaged you as a white person. Right. So, yeah.
All right. Well,
I'll leave it there, Merritt.
Just that little tidbit. What your golden nugget is, but that sounds like it might be it. Take responsibility.
I think it's that, and I think it's be a learner. I mean, that has been life-changing for me. So just because it helps you with your fear. If this stuff is scary and hard, and I know a lot of white folks are well-intended but afraid that they're going to do or say the wrong thing, and so that keeps them from acting. Act anyway. Someone hopefully will call you in if you do or say the wrong thing, and you have to accept that and learn from it, and don't stew in it, and then grow. And that's kept me going, as opposed to being, for a while, I was really scared to take any action because I just didn't want to hurt anyone, really. And it hurts folks more to not take any action, right? So
let's just make just project what we're gonna. I was gonna use the word assume, but we're just gonna anticipate, expect. That's the word. We're gonna expect that we're gonna screw it up. So and expect that you'll call on the carpet, and expect that someone's gonna be upset with you, or many people will be upset with you because either because of something you did personally, or because of something you didn't do personally, or because our association is white people with other white people who have benefited from the privilege.
Yeah.
And that can be benign, or that can be, not. It could be malevolent benefit. Just expect it.
Expect it.
Okay.
And
it's part of the process.
it's
It's part of how we grow.
okay. And find your group of white friends that you can process with, so you're not burdening your friends of color or your colleagues of color. And also to be in community with, like you are one of those folks for me, Merritt, because you and I think similarly, and I can come to you and say, this is really hard and I don't know what to do, because I know that you think, you've done the work that I've done, and you understand things at the level that I do, in terms of leadership and thinking about culture. I think that that's really important, is to have your network of trusted allies that you can go to and talk to, and not constantly calling on your friends of color. Because, if your best friend is a person of color, of course you're going to want to talk to them about everything, but you might want to meter that out a little bit, so that you're not burdening them with your own processing as a white person.
Right. Yeah. And that can be a tricky thing too, because people can look at that and they can say, oh, but don't we want to have an open conversation? And yes, of course you do. And also, it's not anybody else's job to deal with your stuff.
Right.
It's our job to deal with our own stuff.
It's such a tricky conversation, because there's an exclusivity, and it's a really fine line, because as white folks, we already have the majority in every room. We already are relatively free to voice our opinions about anything and everything. And that is a comfort that our BIPOC colleagues don't often have, depending on the organization. And that is, so I think it's a really tricky line to walk, to give white folks in your organization or in your life a place to be in community with other white folks. But I think if your intention is to better understand your own whiteness and your own privilege as a group, so that we can be more in service to our colleagues of color, I think if you go in with that intention, then you're in a better place than just being like, let's talk with white folks, Right. I think you have to be really clear about why you're doing it, because otherwise, and there's so many wonderful companies that have employee resource groups that do that work so well. I know, I've talked to someone who works at Peloton, and they have a really, really awesome network of employee resource groups that are really well managed, and folks have that community support, with other folks. So I think that there's a lot of models of where that's going really well. And if you're in a place where that's just starting, look to those companies and do that research to see how you can create that in your own organization, whether it's big or small. There's lots of models out there of success, but I think it is something we have to do. Yeah. I could talk to you for hours, Merritt.
I know we should start our own podcast altogether.
I would do that. Let's do it.
Let's talk about it. We should do that. But thank you so much, Ellen. It's just such a joy and an honor, and I just to work with you today on this, and to be connected with you. And I appreciate your insight and your heart and your clarity and your intellect. And I just really appreciate you. So thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Merritt. And I appreciate you. And I just am so delighted to reconnect with you and see the amazing work you're doing in the world.
Back at you.
All right.
If you'll hang on one second, I'm just going to close it out. But if anybody wants to reach out to Ellen, maybe you are on Facebook.
I'm only on LinkedIn right now.
You're on LinkedIn. Okay, great.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Ellen Whitlock-Baker. I'm there. I've been off social. Anita. Anita's my biggest fan. I love her so much.
Awesome. I would too, Anita. Okay, great. So just hang on for a minute. I'm just going to close it out, and I'll see you in a bit. All right, everybody. So I just wanted to say thank you again for hanging out with us today. Ellen was an amazing guest. And if you want more of this kind of content, please go ahead and send me a DM and ask me to ask about topics that you'd like to see addressed. We have some amazing guests coming up in all different areas of leadership. Next week is going to be a topic on just me giving you a little bit of content here. But I really appreciate you being here every week. Share this if you want to. Leave your thoughts. Leave your challenging questions, leave your different perspectives. I want to know what you have to think. Thanks so much again for being here, and see you soon. Have a great weekend.